The rain fell steadily over the sleepy town of Riverbend, casting a silvery veil over its streets. On the outskirts, where cracked sidewalks met untamed fields, stood a lonely wooden house with peeling paint. The only sign of life was the American flag fluttering weakly from the porch, its colors faded like the memories of its owner. John Parker, a 93-year-old war veteran, sat in his rocking chair, his eyes fixed on the horizon. The chair creaked with every movement, echoing through the silence of his empty home. He sipped from a chipped coffee cup, his hands trembling as he clutched the warmth. Time had not been kind to John. His once strong frame had withered, leaving behind a frail silhouette. But in his heart, the battles he fought were still fresh, etched into his soul like scars that never faded. On this particular afternoon, a rumble in the distance broke his reverie. John squinted, spotting a young man on a motorcycle, its engine roaring like a beast. The rider slowed as he neared John's house, glancing curiously at the medals displayed on the porch. Their eyes met for a brief moment, one filled with questions, the other with untold stories. For John, it was just another fleeting encounter with a stranger. Little did he know, this meeting would set into motion a chain of events that would change his life forever. The next morning, the town of Riverbend woke under a cloudless sky. A gentle breeze swept through the streets, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted from the diner down the road. Life carried on as usual, small-town chatter, kids on bicycles, and the distant hum of machinery from the old mill. Yet, for John Parker, there was a lingering curiosity from the previous day's encounter with the young biker. He found himself drawn to the porch earlier than usual, the wooden planks creaking beneath his weight. He settled into his rocking chair, his eyes scanning the road, half expecting to see the same rider. But as the morning stretched on, there was no sign of him. John shook his head, chiding himself for thinking anyone would bother visiting an old man like him. Just as he was about to retreat into his solitude, the unmistakable sound of a motorcycle rumbled through the air. John's eyes darted up, and there he was. The young man from yesterday, helmet off, revealing tousled dark hair and a friendly, disarming smile. "Morning, sir," the young man called out, parking his bike near the porch. He took off his leather jacket, revealing a t-shirt emblazoned with the logo of a local biker club. His tone was casual, but his eyes held a genuine warmth that caught John off guard. John's voice was gruff, but there was a hint of curiosity in it. "Morning. What brings you here again?" The biker leaned casually against the fence, clearly in no rush. "Name's Jake. Figured I'd drop by and see how you're doing. Saw those medals on your porch. Figured there's a story behind them." John's grip on the armrest tightened, his mind flashing back to days long past, where comrades were lost and bravery was the only currency that mattered. He hesitated, but something in Jake's easy manner made him speak. "Served in the war. That's all there is to it." Jake raised an eyebrow, sensing the depth behind those simple words. "You don't see many folks from that time around here anymore. My granddad used to tell me stories. He was a soldier, too. Said there's a lot people like me take for granted nowadays." John was silent for a moment, his gaze distant. The words tugged at memories buried deep. He could see the faces of those he served with, hear the distant echoes of gunfire and the shouts of his squadron. But alongside those memories was the pain of returning home, of losing the family he once had. "What's a young guy like you doing, hanging around an old relic like me?" John asked, attempting to mask his discomfort with a hint of a smile. "Aren't you supposed to be out causing trouble with those biker friends of yours?" Jake laughed, a sound so full of life that it seemed to chase away the shadows clinging to John's porch. "Yeah, we get that reputation. But my crew's not like that. They're a bit rough around the edges, sure, but they've got big hearts. Figured if I can listen to stories from my granddad, I can do the same for you." John raised an eyebrow, skeptical but intrigued. "You think there's something worth listening to here, do you?" Jake shrugged, a smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Everyone's got a story, sir. Sometimes it's the ones that never get told that are the most worth hearing." The sincerity in Jake's voice caught John off guard, piercing through the thick walls he had built over decades. A silence settled between them, not uncomfortable, but loaded with unsaid words. For a moment, John considered turning Jake away, but then a voice that had been silent for far too long spoke up within him. "Well, don't just stand there," John muttered, gesturing toward an old wooden chair nearby. "If you've got time to waste on an old man's stories, might as well make yourself comfortable." Jake's smile widened as he took a seat. John began to talk, at first in halting sentences, then in full paragraphs, painting a picture of battles fought and friendships forged in the crucible of war. He spoke of the pride and the pain, the honor and the heartbreak that came with serving. As the sun rose higher, John found himself sharing more than he had in years, surprising even himself. But just when he began to lose himself in the telling, a shadow crossed his face, and he fell silent. "Enough about that," he said abruptly, his voice rougher now. "War stories don't do much good for anyone. What about you? Why'd you really come here, kid?" Jake's easy smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. He looked down at his hands as if gathering his thoughts. "Truth is, sir, I've been looking for something myself. My granddad passed a few months ago, and it's like, I don't know, like I lost a piece of who I am. Thought maybe talking to you, hearing your stories, might help me find my way again." John studied Jake for a long moment, seeing a reflection of a younger version of himself, someone searching for answers in a world that offered none. It stirred a sense of empathy he hadn't felt in years. He nodded slowly. "Maybe we're both looking for something, kid. Guess we'll see if we find it." As they talked on, John felt a shift within him, small, like the first crack in a frozen river before the thaw. Jake's presence, his honest curiosity, was like a ray of light piercing through the gloom of John's solitude. Little did he know, this meeting would be the spark that would set their lives and the town on a path they never expected. Word of Jake's visits with John soon spread among the biker club. They gathered at their usual spot, a dingy garage on the edge of town that served as their clubhouse. Jake told them about the old man, the stories he had shared, and the loneliness he saw in John's eyes. "Look, I know it's not our usual thing, but I think we could do something special for him," Jake said, leaning against his bike, his voice filled with conviction. "The guy's a hero, but it's like the world just forgot about him. Maybe we can change that." The bikers, who were used to seeing themselves as outsiders, exchanged skeptical glances. But the idea resonated with them. Many of them had their own struggles with feeling forgotten, with trying to find a place in a world that moved too fast. One of them, a burly man with a shaved head named Tank, grunted and crossed his arms. "I ain't much for charity cases, Jake, but maybe we owe it to him. Hell, my old man was in Nam. Never got a thanks for it." Jake nodded, sensing he was on the brink of something bigger than himself. "I think we all owe it to him, Tank, to show him he's not alone. Maybe even show this town that we're not just a bunch of troublemakers." A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. One by one they pledged to help, but none of them could have foreseen how this simple idea would grow into something that would bring their entire town to its feet. As the bikers roared out of the garage that night, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the edge of something life-changing. Not just for John, but for each of them. And while John sat alone on his porch, gazing out at the stars, he had no idea that in a matter of days, the sound of rumbling engines would herald the start of a new chapter in his life. It was early Saturday morning when the hum of motorcycle engines filled the air, gradually growing louder until the sound echoed through every street in Riverbend. John, perched on his porch as always, felt the ground vibrate beneath him. He leaned forward, eyes squinting toward the road as the rumbling turned into a thunderous roar. A line of motorcycles, their chrome glinting in the morning sun, emerged from the tree-lined road leading into town. John's hand shook as he adjusted his glasses, unable to believe what he was seeing. Nearly 24 bikers, led by Jake, rolled up in formation, each rider wearing a black vest adorned with the emblem of their club. They came to a stop in front of his house, engines rumbling like a symphony of metal and power. A few neighbors peeked out from their windows, bewildered by the sight. Jake swung off his bike, a wide grin on his face, and approached John, whose face was a mask of confusion. "Morning, John. Hope you don't mind the company." John stared, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" Jake gave a small, almost sheepish shrug. "Thought we'd show you that some people still appreciate what you've done. Figured you might like some company today." A chorus of cheers and nods followed from the bikers, some removing their helmets and offering John respectful nods. But the real surprise came when Tank and another biker wheeled forward a restored motorcycle, a vintage model from the 1940s, polished to a mirror-like shine with deep green paint that matched the hue of John's military uniform. John's eyes widened, his breath catching in his chest as he recognized the model. It was almost identical to the one he had ridden during his younger years, a relic of freedom and memories. He reached out with trembling hands, gently touching the handlebars, his mind flooded with images of long-forgotten rides and moments of joy. "I don't know what to say," John muttered, his voice breaking. He had imagined many things over the years in his isolation, but never this. Never a gesture so grand, from people he barely knew. Jake clapped a hand on his shoulder, his smile warm. "No need to say anything, John. This is just our way of saying thanks, and maybe." He hesitated for a moment, then continued. "Maybe you'd like to take a ride with us?" The bikers exchanged excited glances. John's eyes filled with tears, the weight of his isolation and the sudden warmth of this gesture crashing together like waves. He swallowed hard, struggling to regain control of his voice. I don't think I've got it in me anymore. Haven't ridden in decades." Tank stepped forward, his expression softening for the first time. "You've still got that fire, old man. I can see it. How about we give you a hand?" John stared at the group of leather-clad bikers, rough and scarred, but with eyes full of respect and hope, and for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he thought he had lost forever. Courage. "All right," he said, his voice steadier than before. "Let's do it." The town of Riverbend watched in awe as John Parker, the reclusive war veteran, rode through the streets alongside a procession of roaring motorcycles. His posture was stiff at first, but with each turn of the throttle he began to ease into the rhythm, his movements becoming more fluid. The wind whipped through his thinning hair, and for a moment he felt as young as he had decades ago. People gathered on sidewalks, some recording on their phones, others waving American flags. The sight of the bikers and the veteran riding in unison stirred something deep within the townspeople. Pride, gratitude, and a sense of connection they hadn't felt in years. As they rode past the town square, Jake slowed his bike and signaled for the others to follow. They pulled into a park overlooking the river, a spot where the morning sun gleamed off the water like liquid gold. The bikers parked in a line, and the townsfolk who had followed on foot gathered around, clapping and cheering for John. Jake helped John off the bike, but the old man's hands still clung to the handlebars, as if reluctant to let go of this rediscovered piece of himself. He turned to Jake, his voice rough with emotion. "You've given me something I never thought I'd feel again. Thank you, kid." Jake grinned, but before he could reply, a small group of town officials and community members stepped forward, holding a framed certificate. The mayor, an older woman with silver hair, addressed John with a solemn expression. "Mr. Parker, on behalf of this town, we'd like to formally recognize your service. We've overlooked your contributions for far too long, and today we want to make it right." John's hands trembled as he accepted the certificate, but the real shock came when the mayor revealed a plaque announcing a new annual event in his honor, the John Parker Ride to Remember, a tribute ride to celebrate the town's veterans and raise funds for their support. John's legs nearly gave out as the realization of what was happening hit him. He had gone from being forgotten to being at the heart of something greater than himself. But amid the cheers and applause, a man appeared at the edge of the crowd, his face ashen and uncertain. John's breath caught as he recognized the figure. It was his estranged son, David. John and David hadn't spoken in over 15 years, the silence between them born from old arguments, stubborn pride, and the rift that had widened after the death of John's wife, Mary. Seeing his son now, standing with uncertainty in his eyes, felt like another shock to John's heart, one he wasn't sure he could bear. David took a tentative step forward, his hands buried in the pockets of his jacket. "Dad, I heard about the ride, and I'm sorry for everything." The crowd around them fell silent, sensing the weight of the moment. John, still holding the plaque, struggled to find his voice. He had imagined this reunion so many times, but now that it was here, he felt the words slipping away. Finally, he managed, I didn't think you'd come." David's shoulders sagged, his voice breaking. "I almost didn't. But then I heard what these guys did for you, and I realized I couldn't let it go on like this. Not anymore." The pain of the lost years passed between them like a shadow, but there was something else too, a glimmer of hope. John set down the plaque and took a step toward his son, feeling the weight of years lift from his shoulders. Jake, sensing the need for privacy, gestured for the bikers and the townspeople to give the father and son some space. As the crowd dispersed, John and David sat down on a nearby bench, the quiet murmur of the river filling the silence between them. "I never knew how to make it right after your mother died," John admitted, his voice rough. "I pushed you away because it hurt too much to remember, and I thought you'd be better off without me." David shook his head, his expression pained. "All I ever wanted was to understand, to know why you shut me out." John reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn letter, its edges frayed. He handed it to David with shaking hands. "I found this after she passed. It's from your mother. I never had the courage to open it, until now." David unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the faded words. His voice choked with emotion as he read the final lines. "John, if you're reading this, I hope you find peace someday. I hope you find your way back to David. He needs you more than you know." Tears filled David's eyes, and he turned to his father, seeing the depth of regret and pain that had haunted him for so long. For the first time in years, they embraced, their shared grief and longing mingling in a way that words could never express. From a distance, Jake watched, a sense of satisfaction warming his chest. This was more than he had ever hoped for when he first stopped by John's porch. He could feel the shift in the air, the promise of new beginnings, not just for John and David, but for himself and the entire town of Riverbend. The days that followed the reunion between John and David were filled with a sense of renewed purpose, not only for the father and son, but also for the entire town of Riverbend. The local newspaper ran a story about the unexpected alliance between the bikers and the old veteran, and word spread quickly to nearby towns. Soon, people who had never heard of Riverbend found themselves captivated by the heartwarming tale of the community rallying around a forgotten hero. The momentum built toward the first official John Parker Ride to Remember. The bikers, led by Jake, worked tirelessly to organize the event, coordinating with town officials and veterans groups. They sought donations from local businesses and set up a fund to support aging veterans like John, providing them with home repairs, medical assistance, and companionship. As the day of the ride approached, Riverbend transformed. Flags lined the streets, and volunteers prepared a grand stage in the town square, where John would be honored. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, with local radio stations covering the event, and people arriving from nearby towns to witness the tribute. On the morning of the ride, John woke up earlier than usual. The air was crisp, with the promise of a clear, sunny day. He donned a simple suit, adorned with his military medals, his hands fumbling slightly as he adjusted his tie in front of a dusty mirror. David, standing beside him, reached over and helped with the knot. "You look good, Dad," David said, his voice thick with emotion. He hadn't seen this side of his father in years, dignified, proud, and, most importantly, no longer alone. John caught David's reflection in the mirror and managed a small, grateful smile. "Couldn't have done this without you, son. Or without those bikers. Feels like I've found my way back somehow." David squeezed his father's shoulder, a silent affirmation of the journey they'd taken together over the past few weeks. They both knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Years of distance and hurt couldn't be erased overnight, but for the first time, they faced it together. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the town square filled with people, a vibrant sea of faces and leather jackets, all gathered to honor John Parker. The rumbling of engines was constant as bikers from across the state joined the event, creating a line of motorcycles that stretched for blocks. Veterans in their own faded uniforms mingled with the bikers, sharing stories and laughter. The sense of camaraderie was palpable, a bridge between generations. Jake stood at the front of the stage introducing John to the crowd. His voice was steady, but his eyes gleamed with emotion as he recounted how a simple conversation on a porch had led to this moment. "Sometimes it only takes one act of kindness to change a life," Jake said, "and today we're here to honor a man who gave so much but never asked for anything in return." The crowd erupted into applause as John, supported by David and Jake, made his way to the stage. He stood before the microphone, his frail hands gripping the sides of the podium. For a moment, he struggled to find the words, overwhelmed by the faces looking back at him, some old, some young, but all filled with respect and admiration. "I never thought I'd see a day like this," John began, his voice unsteady. "I spent a lot of years believing that what I did didn't matter to anyone, that I was just another forgotten old man in a forgotten old house. But you proved me wrong." He paused, taking a deep breath, and the crowd leaned in, hanging on his every word. "I learned something from these bikers, men and women who know what it's like to be misunderstood, to struggle, to fight through life's hardships. They reminded me that we're never too old or too broken to find our place again." As he spoke, he caught sight of Jake, standing among the bikers, giving him a thumbs up. John's voice grew stronger, fueled by the unexpected hope that had kindled within him. "This ride isn't just for me. It's for every veteran who thought they'd been left behind. It's for every young person trying to find their way. And it's for every heart that needs a reminder that they're not alone." The crowd fell silent, moved by the raw emotion in John's words. Even Tank, the toughest of the bikers, discreetly wiped a tear from his eye. The ride commenced, with John leading the way on his restored motorcycle, the wind rushing past him as he guided the procession through Riverbend's streets. David rode alongside him, a proud smile on his face, while Jake and the bikers followed in a powerful formation, their engines roaring like a call to action. As the town cheered, John found himself smiling wider than he had in years. The roads that had once seemed so empty now felt alive with the presence of the community that had embraced him. Each turn of the throttle was a reminder of the second chance he had been given, proof that he was no longer alone. They reached the town's Veterans Memorial, where John and David dismounted their bikes and joined the other riders in a solemn moment of silence. John's name had been added to a new plaque, alongside the names of other veterans who had served their country with honor. As he touched the cool metal, he felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. David put a hand on his father's back, and together they laid a wreath at the base of the memorial. John took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face and the steady presence of his son beside him. He looked out at the crowd, at the bikers who had become his friends, and he knew that this wasn't just a tribute, it was a new beginning. John's life continued to change in the weeks that followed. The Ride to Remember became an annual tradition, growing each year as bikers, veterans, and townspeople gathered to honor those who had served. The fund established by Jake's biker group provided much-needed support to local veterans, helping them with medical bills, home repairs, and companionship. John became a regular at community events, sharing his story with younger generations and offering a listening ear to fellow veterans who had felt as lost as he once had. The transformation in him was clear. His steps were a little lighter, his laughter more frequent, and his heart no longer weighed down by loneliness. Jake continued to visit John, their friendship deepening with each conversation. They shared stories of their pasts, but they also dreamed about the future, of more rides, of expanding the reach of their work, and of the possibility of a documentary to capture their journey. David, inspired by the bond his father had formed with the bikers, moved back to Riverbend and became more involved in the town's Veterans Outreach program. He and John spent their days working on small projects around the house, talking about the past but also about the future, discovering that there was still time to create new memories. Riverbend continued to flourish in the wake of the Ride to Remember. The town, once sleepy and divided, found new life as a symbol of hope and community. Each year, more people gathered to participate, and the story of John Parker's transformation spread far beyond the town's borders. Jake's documentary, The Ride of a Lifetime, premiered a year after the first ride, telling the story of a community that came together to change one man's life. The film became a source of inspiration, encouraging viewers to reach out to the veterans in their own towns, to hear their stories, and to honor their service. In one of the final scenes of the documentary, John is seen riding down a country road with Jake beside him, their motorcycles kicking up dust as the sun sets in the distance. The camera captures the look of contentment on John's face, a man who had found not only a new family but a new purpose. As the screen fades to black, a message appears, encouraging viewers to reach out to veterans in their own communities, to listen to their stories, and to make sure they never feel alone again. And so, John Parker's legacy lived on, not as a lonely old man forgotten in a small town, but as a symbol of resilience, kindness, and the power of human connection. The town of Riverbend and the bikers who had rallied around him became a testament to the idea that no one is ever truly alone, that there is always a chance for a new beginning, no matter how late it might come. As the sun sets over Riverbend, John Parker's story reminds us all that a single act of kindness can change a life, and sometimes an entire community. What started as a simple conversation between a young biker and a 93-year-old veteran became a journey of healing, friendship, and hope. John found a second chance at life and, in turn, inspired a town to come together and honor the forgotten heroes among us. His story teaches us that no matter how isolated or lost we may feel, there's always room for new beginnings, and it's never too late to make a difference. If John's story moved you, don't let it end here. Take a moment to reach out to the veterans in your own community. Share their stories, listen to their experiences, and show them that they're not alone. And if you found value in this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with others. Together, we can spread a message of hope and connection. Join us for more inspiring stories like this one, and let's make sure that no one is ever forgotten.